I clearly remember the day when my parents first took me to watch meteor shower. It was truly a mesmerizing moment because I had never seen a meteor shower before, and that actually memories etched in my mind. I started visiting planetariums, started attending telescopic nights, started reading more about space to understand what space, stars, galaxies are. Then came the year 2004 when the twin Mars exploration rovers Spirit and Opportunity landed on Mars. Around the same time, I came across a documentary called Mission Mars. That documentary focused on the story of that rover, like how they were built, how they were tested, what were the challenges of actually landing a real stuff on Mars. It was pretty interesting. I watched that in loops until I literally imbibed every single detail of it. I got more interested, and then I wanted to learn more about the rovers and Mars. So I started making my Mars journal, basically, where I started putting the news articles in the journal. Then I started putting all the pictures of the rovers, like the first few images, or the image of the rover, the robotic arm in action. Everything was actually very fascinating for me because I had never seen Mars like this before. And I was so excited at that time that I was trying to find that one opportunity, like one single chance, maybe in a way that I could somehow contribute to the mission, maybe somehow I could be a part of the mission. And to my surprise, I came across one such program that was Rock Around the World. Basically, the idea was scientists and engineers working on the Mars mission, they wanted to build a rock library. So they asked everyone, like students or anyone for that matter, to send a piece of rock. And the idea was they would take the rock and then let you know what the rock is made up of using the same tool it is on Mars. It was a pretty cool program, and I instantly thought I want to be part of it. So at that time, I had just one piece of rock that I collected from when I was visiting Western Himalayas. So I followed the instructions. I cleaned the rock, polished the rock. The instructions also asked to wash the rock and dry it. So I literally put that inside a microwave, almost burning it. Not the rock, but the microwave. And then I literally sent it. It was so funny because when I went to the post office to mail in the rock, the guy over there asked me what's inside the package. And I replied, it's a rock. He literally smiled at me, laughed at me, and he was like, who does that? But I didn't care. Months passed, and then one day I received a letter. The letter had a unique number that was assigned to my rock. And then I went back to the program's website, and then I was okay, let's give it a shot. And my rock was there. It was there on the website, The Rock Around the World. Now think about it. I was 16 years old then. Back in 2005, I mailed the rock to Arizona, here in the United States. So almost 9,000 miles away from where the rock was. I was on cloud 9 because this was a huge deal for me because I had just made a single teeny tiny contribution to the Mars mission. At that time, I made a dream. I set a goal for myself that one day I'm going to work on a real Mars mission. The only problem to that thing was, though, that I didn't know how. So I started to prepare myself. I started to building skills. I learned engineering in my bachelor's and master's. Started learning new things. Then I took my first job after grad school at MathWorks, where I started making tools that basically helped engineers and scientists to literally land a rover on Mars or maybe touch the sun. But that one thought which I had in my mind almost 12 to 16 years ago, that never went away. So the only way at that time for me was to contribute, was to give talks. So I started giving talks at schools, colleges, libraries, as one of the volunteers for the NASA JPL Solar System Ambassadors Program. Then came the year 2016. When I attended a talk by the lead engineer of an instrument called MOXIE. And suddenly, my dream of actually working on a real Mars mission felt like a reality. Why? Because that instrument was going to go on Mars. I came back home, I shared my experience with my wife, and I told her, how cool the project is. To which she simply replied saying that, why don't you reach out? I was very hesitant because, I was trained in software engineering by my education. The talk primarily focused on chemical engineering part of the project. I was like, I'm not sure what I can bring to the table. But something in me still made me reach out. And that's what I did. I reached out to the lead engineer of MOXIE, asking, can I help? And to my surprise, he replied, and he said yes. That single question actually opened the window of me working on a real Mars mission. Soon, I was in charge of receiving data from MOXIE on Mars. So what really MOXIE is? MOXIE is one of the instruments aboard the NASA's Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. It stands for Mars Oxygen ISRU Experiment. ISRU, it's another acronym which in very simpler term means that you are making a resource out of another resource instead of actually bringing that original resource. If you have to remember one single thing from MOXIE, then it is that it makes oxygen on Mars. So the big question is, why do you need oxygen to begin with on Mars? To answer that question, let's come back on Earth. On Earth, when we're driving the car, we don't realize that we are not only burning the gas, but we are also burning the oxygen. And the same is true for rockets. We need the rocket fuel, but then we also need the oxidizer. And the oxidizer here typically is oxygen. So the idea is now if you go back to Mars, no one would want a one-way trip to Mars, right? Everyone would want to come back. So you would need to bring a lot of oxygen from Earth to Mars. But that's going to be costly, and that's the main problem. So why don't we try making it on Mars? Remember that acronym within acronym thing I mentioned, the ISRU? That's exactly what MOXIE does. Mars's atmosphere is primarily composed of carbon dioxide. MOXIE is nothing but it's more like a tree. It takes the carbon dioxide, with electrolysis, it splits carbon dioxide into carbon monoxide and oxygen. The goal of the MOXIE is not only to make oxygen, but it's an experiment to learn how to make it work, to learn how to operate during different conditions on Mars. After a lot of testing, after a lot of experiments in lab, patience, hard work, we finally ran MOXIE to make oxygen on Mars on April 20th, 2021. It was a huge deal because this has never been done before in the human history. That's all of us, the MOXIE team, celebrating the success of the first ever oxygen production in the history of humankind. Everyone was very happy. And you remember that journal I was making? Guess what? It has got a new chapter, a new entry. But this was special because I was one of those who was actually making it happen. With MOXIE, I actually lived my dream of actually working on a real Mars mission. But if I look at MOXIE, I don't see it as only an experiment or an instrument that actually makes oxygen on Mars. I see it in its literal meaning. I see what happens when a group of people try really hard in doing what they truly believe in. And everything of this did not happen in one shot. Everything happened in single step, one step at a time, and keep trying hard. And I think if I go back to my story, I think that's what I did too, because I did not start with this huge dream. I did not start with something big. I started with something very, very, very small, a curiosity, which eventually led me to do something big. And that is why today I encourage you all to try something you truly believe in. Ask for help, because big things, or anything for that matter, needs teamwork. Keep the efforts one step at a time. You don't need to make big steps right at one moment. It's okay to fall, but then keep trying, because all you need to do at the end is keep that ball rolling. Thank you so much for listening.